the timeless past.
Nightfall exercises in the South China Sea. Night has a way of swallowing the sea. No lights, no landmarks, no horizon to guide the eye. Only the endless roll of black water, stretching in every direction, beneath a sky heavy with silence. It was early June, 1969. The South China Sea lay calm, almost too calm, like the ocean was holding its breath. Across its surface, a fleet of warships moved in formation, steel shadows cutting through the stillness. At the center of that fleet was the Australian aircraft carrier, HMAS Melbourne, a floating airfield, a city of steel. On her decks, aircraft were stowed and secured, her crews steady at their posts, the glow of red lights casting shadows across the hangars and passageways. She was the pride of the Royal Australian Navy, a ship forged for command. Sailing in escort, riding the dark waters at her side, was the United States destroyer, USS Frank E. Evans. She was smaller, leaner, her crew just over 200 men. They called her the Gray Ghost of the East Coast. She had fought in Korea. She had carried sailors through Vietnam. She was worn, but proud, her decks alive with men who had learned to trust her steel, her engines, her speed. Tonight, the carrier and her escorts were locked in a joint exercise known as Sea Spirit. Navies from across the region were there, training, testing, sharpening their readiness in the long shadow of the Cold War. Every maneuver mattered. Every order carried weight. At precisely 2:52 a.m., the order came down. The destroyer Evans was to shift positions, sliding back behind Melbourne into what sailors called plane guard. It was a routine move, a simple, practiced maneuver. Something Evans had done before. Something no one expected would go wrong. But at sea, routine can turn to chaos in the span of a heartbeat. The bridge of the Evans hummed with quiet focus. Radars swept. Compasses ticked. Officers traded clipped commands. Men stared into the black, where Melbourne's dark bulk loomed, barely visible, but there, a silent giant gliding forward. On Melbourne's bridge, Australian officers watched, too. They saw the Evans begin her move. But then, a hesitation. A turn that didn't quite make sense. Steady her up. Maintain course. Voices in the dark. Every man certain he understood what the other meant. Every man convinced the destroyer would fall in line. But she didn't. Evans cut across Melbourne's bow. And in that instant, a line was crossed from safety to disaster. The sea remained calm. The stars remained silent. But history shifted, just slightly, almost invisibly, toward catastrophe. The men on watch couldn't know it yet. The sailors asleep in their bunks couldn't feel it yet. But in less than 10 minutes, steel would meet steel. And the black calm of the South China Sea would explode with fire, with fear, with screams echoing across the water. This is where the story begins. When routine turned fatal. When a destroyer made one wrong move. And when 74 men would never see the dawn. A split-second decision, a rupture in history. It was just after 3 a.m. The sea was still calm. The fleet still moved forward in silence, a line of steel across the South China Sea. On the bridge of the USS Frank E. Evans, the mood was focused, tired men working the graveyard watch, eyes straining against the dark. Orders had been given. The destroyer was to shift into position behind the carrier, HMAS Melbourne. A simple maneuver. Routine. But routine has a way of lulling even the sharpest sailor into false comfort. The destroyer's captain was not on the bridge. He had left junior officers in charge. Men capable. Men trained. But young. And in the unforgiving language of the sea, mistakes can be merciless. On Melbourne's bridge, the Australians watched Evans begin her move. Her bow edged across the carrier's path. Too far. Too fast. Something wasn't right. "Where is she going?" one officer muttered, squinting into the dark. The radar confirmed what their eyes feared. The destroyer was not sliding neatly into position. She was turning, cutting straight across Melbourne's course. A voice rose above the quiet hum of the carrier's bridge. "She's crossing the bow." For a heartbeat, the world seemed to slow. Two great ships, one a giant carrier, the other a nimble destroyer, now locked in a deadly geometry of steel. One wrong angle, one wrong assumption, and there would be no escape. Melbourne's captain ordered the engines thrown astern. The carrier's bow began to swing, her weight fighting the water, straining to slow. But Melbourne was massive, over 20,000 tons of steel and momentum. She could not stop on a dime. She could not yield to a smaller ship in her path. On Evans, alarms broke the silence. Hard right rudder. Hard right. But it was too late. The destroyer's turn had sealed her fate. The collision came like thunder. Melbourne's steel bow carved into Evans at a near right angle, splitting the destroyer in two just forward of her bridge. The sound was not just metal on metal. It was the shriek of tearing bulkheads, the groan of a ship breaking apart, the roar of seawater rushing into open wounds of steel. The forward section of Evans, everything ahead of her midship, was sliced clean away. In seconds, it was gone, swallowed by the sea, taking with it dozens of sleeping sailors trapped in their bunks. Those who survived the impact clung to the twisted decks of the aft section, or hurled themselves into the black water. Shouts cut through the night, confusion, terror, orders shouted and lost in the wind. Men thrashed in the sea, life jackets only half fastened, some struggling to break free of debris. On Melbourne, the crew stood in shock. The massive carrier shook from the impact, her bow dented and smeared with the destroyer's paint and steel. But the damage to Melbourne was nothing compared to the devastation below. Searchlights flickered on, slicing through the black water. What they revealed was chaos. Sailors adrift, clinging to wreckage, calling out for help. The sea was alive with voices, pleading, shouting, crying out names. 74 men would not answer back. 74 lives, ended in the span of a heartbeat. This was no battle. No enemy had fired a shot. It was a collision born of confusion, of fatigue, of misjudgment in the dark. But the ocean does not care about blame. The ocean does not wait for explanations. When steel meets steel, when orders falter, it claims its due. In the water, voices of survival. The sea was black, silent one moment, then torn open the next by cries of men struggling to stay alive. Where once there had been a destroyer cutting confidently through the waves, there was now only wreckage, and the survivors scattered across the water. Imagine it. You are wrenched from your bunk in the dead of night. The floor tilts beneath you. Metal screams. The world seems to split apart. And suddenly, you are not inside your ship. You are in the open ocean. No time to grab boots. No time to think. Just cold water swallowing you whole. Some men surfaced to find themselves alone, nothing but stars above and burning fuel on the water around them. Others clung desperately to floating wreckage, bits of shattered hull, life rings, or half-inflated rafts hurled into the sea. The aft section of USS Frank E. Evans still floated, shorn and broken, lights flickering in the dark. From her decks, wounded sailors were lowered into the water, while others jumped, terrified of being pulled under with her. The screams were haunting. Some called for friends. Some called for God. Others called out their own names, hoping, praying, that someone would hear them and know they were still alive. The sea was calm, but to the men fighting for breath, it was merciless. Diesel fuel and oil spread across the surface, stinging eyes, burning throats, choking lungs. The smell was thick, clinging. Every kick of the legs brought a mouthful of bitter seawater. Those who had trained for this moment found their instincts fighting panic. Inflate your life vest. Stay calm. Conserve your strength. But in the chaos, with brothers disappearing around you, calm was nearly impossible. From the bridge of HMAS Melbourne, searchlights swept the water. The carrier's crew scrambled to lower boats, desperate to pull men from the sea. Australian sailors leaned over the rails, throwing down ropes, calling out into the dark. Over here! Grab hold! And in the water, cold and afraid, American voices answered back. Here! I'm here! Help! Someone, help us! The Australians worked frantically, pulling men up, dragging them into boats, wrapping blankets around their shaking bodies. Every survivor hauled aboard was a victory. But for each one rescued, many more remained adrift. Some men would never be found. Trapped in the forward section when it sheared away, they went down with their ship in seconds. Others, stunned and broken by the impact, drifted quietly beneath the waves before help could reach them. Survival that night was a cruel lottery. A matter of where you were standing when steel met steel. A matter of luck, pure and simple. Those who lived would never forget the sounds. The tearing of metal. The rushing of water. The desperate, fading cries of shipmates slipping beneath the surface. Years later, survivors would say, "The sea was calm. The stars were bright. And then, it was like the ocean itself had turned against us." They were sailors. They were trained. They had faced storms and gunfire. But nothing prepared them for the loneliness of that night, adrift, in the blackness, waiting for rescue, never knowing if it would come in time. Investigations, accountability, and memory. Dawn crept slowly over the South China Sea. The black of night gave way to a gray horizon, and in that pale light, the true scale of the disaster was revealed. The USS Frank E. Evans was gone, her forward half lost forever beneath the waves, her aft section clinging stubbornly to the surface. Debris floated in every direction. Life rafts bobbed, some empty, some crowded with shivering survivors. And the sea itself seemed heavy with silence, broken only by the sobs of men who had lived through the unthinkable. 74 sailors did not answer muster that morning. 74 names, sons, brothers, husbands, fathers, were gone. The questions began immediately. How could this have happened? How could a destroyer, with radar, trained officers, and clear orders, have turned across the bow of an aircraft carrier in calm seas? On HMAS Melbourne, Captain John Stevenson carried the weight of that question heavily. He had seen it before. Just 5 years earlier, in 1964, Melbourne had been involved in another collision, striking and sinking the destroyer HMAS Voyager, killing 82 Australian sailors. Now, history had repeated itself, and the eyes of two navies turned toward him. A court of inquiry convened. Officers in crisp uniforms sat behind tables heavy with documents and maps. Witnesses stepped forward, men who had been on the bridge, men who had given orders, men who had survived the chaos. Testimony painted a picture of miscommunication. Evans' junior officers had misunderstood their maneuver. One thought the destroyer should turn to starboard, right, while another believed she was to pass across Melbourne's bow. In the confusion, Evans executed the worst possible choice. And Melbourne, despite desperate efforts to slow and turn, could not avoid the impact. The inquiry ruled that the primary blame lay with Evans' officers, for misinterpreting orders and for failing to keep their ship clear of the carrier's path. But Melbourne's crew did not escape scrutiny. Critics asked, could the carrier have done more to prevent the collision? Could warnings have been sounded sooner? The findings brought little comfort. Courts-martial followed. Careers ended. Reputations were scarred. But for the families of the 74 dead, no judgment could ever balance the scales. Back home in America, telegrams arrived in towns and cities across the country. Mothers opened doors to find uniformed men with folded papers. Wives clutched children to their sides as the words were read aloud. "We regret to inform you." In churches, in school gyms, in quiet graveyards, memorials were held. Photographs in black frames. Flags folded and presented to trembling hands. And empty chairs at kitchen tables where fathers and sons had once sat. At sea, the surviving crew of Evans carried their own burden. Guilt. Why them? Why had they been spared when so many others had not? They replayed the collision in their minds, again and again, searching for answers that would never come. Some never spoke of it again. Others dedicated their lives to telling the story, ensuring the names of the lost were never forgotten. For the navies of the world, the collision became a grim lesson. Procedures were rewritten. Communication drills were sharpened. The importance of absolute clarity between ships was drilled into every new officer. Because at sea, in the black of night, there is no room for doubt. A single misinterpreted order can tear steel apart and take dozens of lives with it. The South China Sea moved on, as oceans always do. The waves erased the oil slick. The wreckage drifted away. But the memory of that night lived on, in the records of history, in the scars of survivors, and in the names carved into stone memorials. 74 sailors, forever young, forever at sea. A modern parallel, USS Fitzgerald, 2017. Nearly half a century passed. Technology advanced. Ships grew faster, more automated, more powerful. Radars sharpened, satellite systems connected every bridge to a global network of information. And yet, for all the progress, the sea still waited, indifferent, patient, unforgiving. It was the early hours of June 17, 2017. Off the coast of Japan's Izu Peninsula, the USS Fitzgerald, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, cut silently through the dark. She was a marvel of engineering. Over 500 feet long, bristling with sensors, missiles, and the latest in naval warfare technology. Her mission: protect the Pacific Fleet, stand ready in a world of rising tensions. But that night, she was vulnerable. Not from an enemy missile. Not from hostile fire. But from the same danger that had haunted sailors for centuries: the risk of collision. The sea was calm. Visibility was good. But the hour, just after 1:30 a.m., was dangerous. The circadian dead zone, when fatigue weighs heaviest, when judgment dulls, when vigilance falters. On the horizon, lights appeared. A commercial vessel, the ACX Crystal, a container ship nearly 3 times Fitzgerald's size, was steaming along its course. From a distance, her lights seemed steady, her intentions clear. But on the bridge of the Fitzgerald, something was missed. A calculation. A warning. A decision delayed by seconds. At 1:30 a.m., the Crystal's bulbous bow smashed into Fitzgerald's starboard side with terrifying force. The impact tore open steel plating, crushing compartments deep inside the ship. Water rushed in with unstoppable fury, flooding berthing areas where sailors slept in stacked bunks. The force was so violent it crumpled living spaces, trapping men inside as seawater surged through in darkness. In moments, those compartments were gone. 7 sailors, asleep one moment, gone the next. Above deck, the scene was chaos. The ship lurched, alarms blared, lights flickered. Crews stumbled from their racks, choking on the smell of fuel and saltwater. Officers scrambled to damage control stations, shouting orders over the roar of rushing water. The captain's cabin, crushed by the collision, pinned him inside. It took desperate hands and frantic effort to free him and carry him to safety. But the ship itself, though wounded, did not sink. Watertight doors were sealed, pumps roared to life, and sailors worked tirelessly to stabilize their battered vessel. By morning, Fitzgerald limped back into port, her side caved in, her scars plain for the world to see. News spread quickly. 7 sailors dead. Families awoke to phone calls, to knocks at the door, to headlines flashing across screens. The world was shocked. How, in the 21st century, with radar, with GPS, with every technological safeguard, could a billion-dollar warship collide with a commercial freighter? The investigation revealed the painful truth. It was not technology that failed. It was people. Fatigue. Lapses in judgment. A breakdown in basic seamanship, simple watchstanding discipline, that turned a routine night into tragedy. For the U.S. Navy, the loss cut deep. 7 names were added to a long list of sailors lost not in battle, but to the cruel indifference of the sea. The memory of the USS Frank E. Evans returned like a ghost from 1969, reminding everyone that history's lessons must never be forgotten. Steel changes. Radars improve. Ships grow stronger. But sailors remain human. And at sea, a single mistake, one misread course, one delayed order, can turn calm waters into a grave. Echoes across time. The ocean does not age. It has no memory, no mercy, no sense of time. To the sea, it does not matter whether the year is 1969 or 2017, whether men navigate by sextant and compass, or by satellites and digital screens. The rules remain the same. And the price of error is eternal. The USS Frank E. Evans and the USS Fitzgerald were separated by nearly 50 years. One was a battle-hardened destroyer from the Second World War era. The other, a sleek, modern warship bristling with 21st-century technology. But when disaster struck, their stories were eerily alike. Both collisions happened at night, in calm seas, under clear skies. Both began with small misjudgments, a course not corrected, a warning not heeded, an order misinterpreted. Both ended in chaos, steel ripped open, compartments flooded, sailors cast into darkness. And in both tragedies, it was not the enemy that claimed lives, it was the sea. Survivors from Evans spoke of the eerie quiet after the impact. How the cries of their shipmates echoed, then faded into silence as the black water closed over them. Decades later, Fitzgerald's crew would say much the same. How the ship filled with smoke and seawater. How men fought desperately to save shipmates, only to find sealed hatches and rising floods. Different years. Different ships. The same fear. The same loss. For navies, these collisions became grim teachers. From Evans came hard lessons about command responsibility, clarity of orders, and the need for constant vigilance during maneuvers. From Fitzgerald came reminders that even the most advanced technology cannot replace the sharp eyes and steady judgment of trained sailors on watch. Procedures were rewritten. Drills tightened. Warnings repeated endlessly in classrooms, on simulators, and on bridge wings around the world. And yet, every sailor knows the truth. The ocean remains undefeated. It waits in silence, patient, ready to punish any lapse, no matter how small. When sailors gather, they sometimes speak of ghosts. Not the kind that rattle chains in dark corridors, but the ghosts of men lost at sea. Names whispered on memorial days. Faces remembered in photographs yellowed with time. Stories told by survivors, their voices heavy with memory. The ghosts of Evans. The ghosts of Fitzgerald. They are reminders. Reminders that the sea is not conquered, not tamed, not safe. 2 collisions. 2 generations. 2 sets of families left with folded flags and empty chairs. And yet, across time, their voices join together, warning us, urging us, demanding that we never forget the lessons written in saltwater and steel.